For the Sherpa people of Nepal, intelligence is measured by one's ability to survive in a harsh environment. But if you live in an industrialized nation, intelligence has an entirely different connotation. For example, if a research scientist discovered a way to save lives by making air travel safer, she might find herself labeled a genius. So what is intelligence? Is it something that can be easily defined, or does the meaning of the word change depending upon the society in which you live?
I define intelligence as the ability to solve challenges in adapting to one's environment.
Intelligence may be inferred from how people's individual abilities, either in verbal or in spatial or perceptual domains, are expressed in problem-solving situations, in challenging situations.
I define intelligence as the ability to succeed in your life, given your own definition of what you mean by success within your societal context.
Think for a moment about how you would define intelligence. Can you put it into words? If you're like most people, you can probably recognize intelligence when you see it. You may even think that you are an intelligent person. But if you suddenly found yourself amongst the Sherpa tribe of Nepal, would the people of that culture assess you in the same way?
My name is Ang Choldem Sherpa. I'm from Nepal, which is, we call that part of Nepal is Khumbu, Solo Khumbu. And most of the Khumbu, Solo Khumbu, is the Sherpa people lives in that place. It's way on the way up to the Everest Base Camp. It is center of the Everest Base Camp way, in the middle, and about 13,000 feet. Sherpa is strong people too, I would say. And most of the Sherpa people lives only the very high part of Nepal. And most of the Sherpa people climbs mountains.
If you live in an industrial nation, a Sherpa guide may not be the first person that comes to mind when you think of intelligence. And yet, this humble mountaineer keeps people alive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. And intelligence certainly plays a role in this ability. But for many people, the image of intelligence brings to mind an individual with great analytical skills. NASA research scientist Sandy Lozito fits that description.
Some of the work that I do here at NASA involves looking at communications for pilots and controllers in what we call the National Airspace System, basically the airspace that we all fly in, at least in this country. Currently, those communications are primarily handled, for example, when a controller gives a flight crew an instruction to turn or climb, are primarily handled through the voice channel, through VHF-type communications. The FAA and some other users, like the airlines, are interested now in trying to move to new technology because there's a basic frequency congestion problem in the voice communications. So my job in that is to try to look at the feasibility of the technology, but more specifically, to look at what kind of new problems may be introduced if you move to that technology.
So what do we mean when we say a person is smart or intelligent? Psychologists have studied this question for more than a century. Yet there are many different opinions on what constitutes intelligence and what is the most effective way to measure it. French psychologist Alfred Binet was one of the first to take on the challenge.
Alfred Binet is usually given credit for having invented the modern IQ test. He was working in Paris and was asked by the school board of Paris to devise a test that could discriminate kids who would be capable of functioning normally in school from kids who would have trouble with school because of some intellectual deficiency of some sort. And he devised a test using methodologies that had been around for a while to do this, and the test worked.
Binet's test focused on elementary skills such as memory, attention, and the ability to understand similarities and differences. The tests were designed to ask the easy questions first and then gradually progress to higher levels of difficulty.
One of the things that Binet did as he had these children taking these different tests, if they succeeded at the first level, they would go to the next level and so forth and so on. What he found was that the brighter children tended to perform at the same level as an older child. In other words, a very bright 7-year-old would probably be able to perform the same level of tasks, mental tasks, as an average 9-year-old.
Binet's observations led him to the idea of assigning a mental age to each child, a number that would reflect the cognitive level at which the child was operating. Based on this evaluation, children who needed special help would be placed in classes to give them the assistance they needed. At least, that was Binet's original intention. But that focus changed with the next major incarnation of intelligence tests. Developed by Stanford University psychologist Lewis Terman in 1916, the Stanford-Binet test expanded the field of intelligence measurement.
It wasn't just to identify kids who might, through some retardation, have difficulty with school performance, but was to be administered to the general population and make discriminations among normal levels of intelligence, high to low. And then the test, of course, took on a very different cast and meaning in society than it had in the hands of Binet and the Paris School Board.
Lewis Terman believed that intelligence was an inborn fixed characteristic. He therefore designed a test that would express the level of intelligence in terms of a single number called the intelligence quotient, or IQ. The number was derived by dividing an individual's mental age by his chronological age, and then multiplying the result by 100. The new IQ test gained widespread acceptance and was used to address some critical needs.
The advantages of intelligence tests are that they provide a single summary score for each individual, which allows placement of children into appropriate classrooms. Intelligence tests show a correlation with educational attainment, occupational status, many, many things.
But it had its drawbacks.
There was a need to sort of triage personnel as they came into the Army as to those who would be most effective as officers and those who would be most benefit from training that would lead to leadership roles in the military, and those who wouldn't. And so the IQ test got sold to the United States government and the Army as an instrument that would meet that need. Another need laying around was in immigration and in the teens after World War I and in the 1920s. And this is where it had some of its more nefarious role in American history, was to be used as a way of screening certain immigrant populations from access to the United States. And as was the pattern of results in those days, Southern Europeans, Jews, Eastern Europeans did not score as well on those tests as did Northern Europeans, British and the like. And so that became a de facto means of shaping the nature of immigration into the United States.
Intelligence tests were used indiscriminately to test virtually all ages and types of people entering the country, with no adjustment made for their cultural background. To make matters worse, the Stanford-Binet test popularized the notion that people are born with a certain level of intelligence, one that rarely changes. As a result, false conclusions about the intellectual capacity of different nationalities took shape, and hostility toward the test began to spread.
Disadvantages of intelligence tests refer to the fact that they may not get at real-life intelligence in a practical sense. There have been some alternative theories proposed for that. The other difficulty that some people have with intelligence tests is that it may not give us information about every aspect of a person. Sometimes people do very well in an intelligence test, and yet in particular problem-solving situations, they may not do as well.
It wasn't until the 1950s when a psychologist named David Wexler developed a new test that things began to change. Wexler recognized that the old cookie-cutter approach to intelligence testing simply wouldn't work. The alternative he came up with came to be known as the Wexler Adult Intelligence Scale, or WAIS.
It involved both verbal tests, which is what we more commonly think of as IQ or intelligence tests, like vocabulary and so forth, verbal reasoning. But he also had what he termed the performance tests, which were more mental imagery and that kind of thing, nonverbal intelligence, spatial relations, that sort of thing. His test did give a global IQ score, but you can see the breakdown so that you can identify specific strengths or weaknesses in an individual score.
Ironically enough, and maybe Wexler developed it this way, by developing his test, he really went back to the original notion that Binet had set forth with the first intelligence test. That is, to identify the strengths and the weaknesses in an individual profile of the person taking the test.
Wexler's contributions to the field of psychology did not stop there. He also formulated a definition of intelligence that broadened our understanding of the concept.
The way that David Wexler defined intelligence is the global capacity to think rationally, to act purposefully, and to deal effectively with the environment. And if you look at that as a definition, you can see that that actually covers quite a bit of ground in what we think of in terms of what is intelligent behavior, whether you're talking about how to, fix your car, or which college courses to take, or what kind of term paper to write. All of those types of activities are marked by intelligence. They're all examples of how we use intelligence every day.
With this in mind, it's easy to see how Wexler's definition of intelligence could be applied to people from widely varying backgrounds, such as a Sherpa or a research scientist.
When I conduct my research, I definitely have to have problem-solving skills, especially when I am involved in a large-scale simulation study, because those tend to involve a lot of different organizations, which means that along with having a lot more resources that you can rely on, you have a lot more problems that are introduced.
We have to know to take the people to the high altitude. The biggest skill we have to know is about altitude sickness. And as much as we can, the medical things, that's very, very important. And we need to know very important thing about, take care a bit about food. That's very important. And when people get a little bit, poison from food or get sick a little bit, people cannot get admitted to where they wanted to go. And the other thing is, the transportation about the gear, what they wanted to take this gear. So we have to support and we have to help for them to take up. So these things are very important for guide.
I believe that there are universal aspects of intelligence, namely certain mental processes. So, for example, the scientist and the Sherpa guide in their lives have to recognize problems, figure out if there's something wrong. It's looking at perhaps the plans for a rocket and seeing, is this really going to take off? The Sherpa guide has to do the same thing. He or she is entrusted with guiding people on very difficult terrain, and it's a life or death matter. The guide has to recognize if there are potential weather problems or problems in terms of the navigation that will make it implausible to keep going. So recognizing the existence of a problem is key.
I was in the north side from Tibet climbing with a British guy. We were trying to go to the summit to two of my clients, and we went about almost half of the way. And the other my clients, I was really cold. Get bad, all the ice and everywhere in the face and hard time to walk. And I just look at it back, and big storm is coming right behind us. And I feel like the snow, was dropping. And I said, this is not a good idea to go up. and we turned back. That day, 3 Indian guys was died on the way, because I think they made it to the summit, but on the way back they couldn't make it to the camp. So we didn't make it to the summit, but we came by life.
Finding a definition of intelligence that fits people from different cultures is one thing. But how effective would Wechsler's test be in assigning an IQ score to people who live in totally different worlds, such as a research scientist and a Sherpa? Since most scientists have strong reading and writing skills, the scientist would probably do well on the test. The Sherpa, however, would be a different story.
The Sherpa would probably have a more difficult time because his or her experience would be more in terms of practical intelligence, bodily kinesthetic, hands-on intelligence. How do I deal with this type thing, as opposed to drawing from traditional intelligence or what a traditional IQ test reveals, that is, information that you learn in school.
If the Sherpa were to do poorly on the WAIS test, does it mean that he lacks intelligence? Not at all. It does, however, reveal an inherent shortcoming of all intelligence tests.
There are a lot of cognitive abilities, intellectual abilities, that are central to functioning in society that are probably not well measured by those tests.
Why are the different forms of intelligence so difficult to measure? Robert Sternberg has a theory.
Analytical intelligence, the kind that is measured by things like IQ tests, SATs, ACTs, GREs, the whole alphabet soup, I don't think that is terribly hard to measure. And what's happened is that scientists and others tend to go for the easy things. So because it's kind of easy-ish to measure, they've put a lot of attention to measuring it. But the cost of that is that the people in the field of testing haven't tackled what I think are the really hard problems, like how do you measure whether someone's creative? We try to do that. So what we'll do is things like ask them to write a short story, or we might ask them to do a piece of art. So you can measure creativity. It just takes a little bit more creativity on the part of the tester.
Psychologist Howard Gardner attempted to paint a more expansive picture of what intelligence is. With his theory of multiple intelligences, Gardner includes skills and products that are valued in different cultures.
Gardner's multiple intelligences theory basically is looking at 8 or more different intelligences. Naturalist intelligence basically is someone that has the ability to discern flora and fauna in nature, a zoologist, a biologist. Another intelligence that Gardner talks about is interpersonal intelligence. This is somebody that understands another person's motives, feelings, ideas. Somebody like a teacher, a nurse. Another intelligence is intrapersonal intelligence. This intelligence basically means that the individual is very much in tune with their own feelings, motives, desires.
Logical mathematical intelligence is also on Gardner's list. This would be someone who gravitates toward abstract thinking and enjoys working with logical type sequences. Professionals that exemplify this type of intelligence include scientists and mathematicians.
Musical intelligence. This is somebody that has a sense of pitch, of timbre, of rhythm. Someone like a musician, somebody that sings, really enjoys music, is aware of his or her musical environment. Another intelligence that Gardner talks about is spatial intelligence. This is an individual that has the ability to perhaps see in his or her mind's eye shapes, forms, visually see something. Somebody like an artist.
One of Gardner's more novel categories is bodily kinesthetic intelligence. This entails the control of bodily motions and the ability to handle objects skillfully. And finally, linguistic intelligence is the ability to use language effectively. Orators and writers are good examples. We can all see ourselves in Gardner's categories. But are these really examples of intelligence? Some psychologists say no. In fact, they point out that several of Gardner's intelligences would be better categorized as talents. Robert Sternberg agrees with this criticism. In response, he's formulated his own theory, known as the triarchic theory of intelligence.
The basic idea of the triarchic theory is that people who are intelligent know what they do well, and then they make the most of it in their life. They somehow incorporate it in their lives and use it. They figure out what they don't do well, their weaknesses, and then they find ways around that.
I believe that one of my strengths is that I know what it is that I don't know, and I try to use the resources around me. Many of the people that work with me, for example, have skills in particular areas that are much stronger than mine, and I enjoy that because I know that I can go to that individual and ask a question about something that I don't know too much about.
The triarchic theory focuses on three critical areas: analytical ability, creative intelligence, and practical intelligence.
Analytical intelligence is what you use when you analyze things like problems. So, for example, you analyze a mathematics problem, or you might compare and contrast two systems of government, or you might critique something like critique a concert. What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? Why? But the basic idea is this sort of critical thinking that you do. Practical intelligence is what you use when you put into practice your abilities. So, for example, you learn something in a math class and you use it in doing your income taxes. Or you might implement something, like you or someone else has come up with a plan, and it's one thing to have the plan, but can you really make it work? Creative intelligence is what you use when you come up with good new ideas. So you might create a poem, or you might create a work of art, or you might create a relationship with somebody. Or imagine what it would be like if temperatures in the world increased 20 degrees all of a sudden. What would be the effects? So what's common to all these things is thinking in relatively novel ways rather than familiar ways.
Like many other areas of psychology, the nature of intelligence continues to be a subject of much research. However, of all the questions surrounding human intelligence, none is more controversial than the question of its origins. What would happen if we took newborn twins and placed one in Los Angeles and one in Nepal? Would their genetic makeup predispose them for success in one environment and failure in the other? Or do their chances of survival simply depend upon their ability to adapt and learn from the environment in which they are placed?
We're at the point now where most psychologists would agree that both the genes and the environment do play crucial roles in fashioning our intellectual ability. Perhaps the disagreement concerns exactly how much of each contributes to the mix.
On the nature side of the debate, heritability is one of the things that psychologists point to as evidence of genetic influence on intelligence. Heritability represents the percentage of variation within a given population that is due to heredity. When this concept is applied to intelligence, the results are compelling.
One of the best examples of how genetics may influence intelligence comes from a pair of twins who were raised apart in England. One was raised in a family in which educational opportunities and reading materials were readily available, and the other was raised in a family in which such opportunities were simply not there. However, the twin in the second family was enormously interested in reading and had a library card and did quite a bit of reading on her own. When the twins were reunited and studied at Minnesota, we found that they were both extremely intelligent, both very well matched in intelligence, and both avid readers of the same kinds of materials. This is a nice example of how individuals will create or seek out opportunities consistent with their genetically based tendencies.
Convincing as this story may be, not all twins follow this example. Dr. Siegel and other researchers have seen cases in which environment seems to have had a stronger influence on the twins' intelligence.
We have seen reared-apart identical twins who have come from different sorts of homes, and in some cases, the more educationally advantaged twin has done better in IQ testing, in other sorts of mental performance tests than the other co-twin has. I think we need to realize that environments really begin in the womb. It could be that one twin receives more prenatal nutrition than the other, or one twin has more difficult birth history than the other. And all of these things at some level might cause depression of intellectual ability in one of the twins.
Regardless of its origin, intelligence plays a role in helping us adapt and survive in familiar and unfamiliar environments.
I got here from Nepal a little bit, everything is very amazing, everything is big. That's a big car and traffic and big road, because we don't have that. Because we actually, where I live is I have to walk, so we don't drive. So that's everything is very different.
If I was to be stuck on a mountainside somewhere, then the only thing that I could hope would help me is that the ability to try to be resourceful, to try to kind of assess the situation and figure out what resources I had around me, either in terms of equipment or people that might be able to help. I suspect that I would not fare very well in that situation, however.
And so, the debate about intelligence continues. What is it? Can it be measured? And what factors influence it? Although the answers to these questions vary amongst different people and cultures, one thing is certain. The many ways in which intelligence manifests itself makes our world a very interesting place.